Right, so I mentioned before that there are lots of different ways of doing this. There isn't one way to build, create, plan, or plot a novel. So if anyone tells you there is, don't trust them. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about different writers and their ways of doing it. So writers often come up with metaphors to describe their writing process. Probably not that surprising. Creative, wordy people, they're bound to come up with metaphors. Here are a few that I've come across. First of all, the idea of growing a tale, and I got this really from an essay written by Hilary Mantel, which I'll give you a reference for later. This is the idea of writers as gardeners, of writing as an organic process. And often writers who work this way, they'll collect physical artefacts, postcards, maps, snippets of text. They might use a corkboard or a folder. Although they're engaging in quite a physical process often, what they're really doing is building the idea within themselves, and those physical artefacts are just helping. Like I said, this is the way Hilary Mantel works, so there's got to be worse models. But there are other ways of doing it. So, for example, Stephen King talks about writing as archaeology, as stories, as found relics, and he talks about this quite a lot in his book On Writing. And if you see interviews with him, there's quite a lot online on YouTube if you take a look. And this is the idea that you dig out the story. Stephen King thinks about his story a lot before he starts writing, but he doesn't plan and plot in any traditional way. He writes lots of words and then chips away at that draft until he gets the actual story. An interesting way of doing it. Wouldn't work for me, but who am I to argue with Stephen King? And then there's the idea of planning or designing a story, kind of that you're an architect of the story. If you read the snowflake method that I pointed you to in a previous lecture, that's the idea behind that. The idea that you design, you plan, you control, and you only finally write the story at the end. In my opinion, in reality, certainly my process and the process of most people that I've spoken to, it tends to be a pick and mix of all of these things and maybe other stuff as well. There are probably as many ways of working as there are writers. So there is no right or wrong, there is no one size fits all. And really what it's about is finding your own way and finding what works for you. So how can you do that? How can you find what works for you? Well, actually, probably really the only way that you're going to find out what works for you as a novelist is to write a novel and find out which bits work, which bits don't, and generally develop a process over time. It's not easy, it's not quick, there's no simple solution, but here are a few things that might help guide you along the way. So maybe just think about what kind of person you are. What kind of brain do you have? Are you a very organised, logical person? I kind of am. And so one of the ways that I've plotted and planned is with lists. I've actually even used Excel spreadsheets for my sins. But that's not going to work for everyone because some people would find that a complete straitjacket. So if you're more of a free-form, splurge it out kind of person, then you might want to write a lot of words before you start planning. Or you might want to do what Stephen King does, write loads of words and then chip away at them. Or you might want to collect kind of things that make you think about the story, that bring you there, that pull you in. So what kind of person are you? But also, what kind of book are you writing? That could be important. If you're writing a thriller, you're probably going to need to plot that a lot more carefully than if you're writing a sprawling, epic, literary novel. So that's important as well. But ultimately, there is no right or wrong answer for this. It's really about finding something that works for you. And it might change from book to book, and it might change as you grow and develop as a writer. I know that's certainly what I've found. But my biggest advice is just start doing stuff around your book. Just start reading stuff and listening to stuff and printing stuff and collecting things that are around the theme of your book. Go to Pinterest, create a Pinterest board, that kind of thing. So this isn't a simple thing. There isn't a yes or no answer, but play, be creative, be playful, and see what happens next. So this is just a bit of further reading on this subject that might help you. These two things really are almost the opposite ends of the scale in terms of how writers work, I think. So we've got the very organic method that Hilary Mantel has found so productive, and she writes about this in an essay called Growing a Tale, which is in a collection called The Agony and the Ego, edited by Claire Boylan. Lots of useful essays in there, but Hilary's particularly about writing process and about that organic way of working. And then the snowflake method, which is the more logical architect planning and plotting method, which I've mentioned before, but always worth mentioning again. And you can find that at advancedfictionwriting.com, or if you just do a Google search on the snowflake method, it will come up. I hope those are helpful for you, and I'll see you in the next lecture.